For those watching this presentation on the Parsha, on Parshat Masei, the last Parsha in Sefer B'Midbar, on Shevii of the Parsha, the seventh Aliyah of the Parsha, or for those listening to this on the recording that's available on Google and OneDrive, or on the Yeshiva site, I have to make an apology, but only for those people who also listened to what I said this year about Shvii of Parshas Matos. And I'm going to introduce what I'm about to say on Masei with the same kind of introduction that I said on Matos. For those who are sticklers, who compare them, it might be they'll tell a story a little bit differently, but that's the way the world is. Let me explain. This year, Matos Masei is a double parsha. We read both of them. I'm trying to cover every parsha individually, but it would be remiss of me if somebody is just listening to Masei not to skip Masei, what I said in Matos, because this week we are laning, as we often do, Matos Masei together. And the important thing about Matos Masei is, and particularly important this year, is that Matos Masei will come before Av, before Rosh Chodesh Av, and the one way or another, and when Av comes, we have to consider other things. Now, of course, when Av comes, we consider the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Tisha B'Av. But it's brought down in Sfarim that Av is the Rashi Tevot, the letters Aleph, Beit, spell out. Aleph is for Elul, and Beit is for Ba. Elul is coming. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter used to say that a person should live his whole life as if it's Elul. What does it mean to live your life as it's Elul? In Elul, and Rabbi Yisrael Salanter also used to say, Elul, the fish in the river are trembling for the Yom Adin, the day of judgment. I told the story that when I came to Israel, and first Shabbos I stayed with my father, and it's also 39 years to the day that I came to Israel as I'm recording this, and in Shul, people said hello to me, and one guy comes over to me, he says, what are you going to be doing in Israel? So I said, I'm going to be a mashgiach in a yeshiva, in Yeshivat HaMivdar. So he said, a mashgiach? Oh, when are you starting? I said, Rosh Chodesh Elul. I'm starting in Elul. He says, Elul, you'll tell the boys. And he was now giving me, and going into the kind of giving Musar mood, like not giving me Musar necessarily, even though he's telling me what I should tell the guys, but as if he were speaking to the guys himself, right? Like a mashgiach in a yeshiva has to say this. So he told me what I have to say. And what I had to say was, tell them that Rabbi Yisrael said that when Elul comes, the fish in the river are trembling from the ema, from the fear, from the fear and trembling from the ema of the Yom Adin. The fish in the water are trembling. I said, listen, I got it. I've heard that before. I've heard that from mashgichim before. I know that. But if I tell the guys in the yeshiva that I'm going to, where they're coming from, if I tell them that, they'll cart me off to a nearby institution known as the Kfar Shaul. There was a mental hospital not far from the yeshiva, psychiatric hospital, Kfar Shaul. cart me off. What are the fish in the water trembling? So the fish in the water were trembling. Maybe they were trembling. They were trembling in the rivers of Lita. But I'm not so sure that the guys get that reference. They don't know what the waters of Lita, were. So, in any case, it's nonetheless true. It remains true that it behooves us to start speaking about significant things that are coming up. And the significant thing that is coming up, Rosh Chodesh Av, is Tisha B'Av, but all of Av is about tshuva, getting ready for tshuva, right? And the only way the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed is through tshuva. Sof Yisrael asos tshuva. But when will it be? Okay. Shevii of Parshas Masei, what we conclude Sefer Bamidbar with, maintains a theme that begins in Parshas Pinchas, is found in Matos, and specifically in Matos, in such a way that is reflected once again at the end of Masei. In Pinchas, we have the daughters of Tzlavchad coming to Moshe and saying it's not fair that we don't get a portion. Our father Tzlavchad only had daughters. He had 5 daughters, and yet we're not going to get any portion of land in Israel. Our father's name will be forgotten. And Moshe brings this case to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells in Parshas Pinchas, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Kain benos Tzlavchad Dovros. They're right. And therefore, they will get a portion, right? They are from the tribe of Menashe. In the end of Parshas Matos, we have, as we said, the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain come and want the portion of Transjordan, of the other side, the Mizrach, the east side of the Jordan, right? After the conquests of Sichon, the Eretz HaGilad, right? But at the end of the parsha, we find out about why this land is called the Gilad land, is because at the end of Matos, the families of Mishpachat Bnei Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe, who is Mishpachat Bnei Yosef, they actually go and they conquer this land, particular part of the land, and that's the Chatzi Shevet Menashe, or part of the Chatzi Shevet Menashe, that's in the Aver HaYarden, on the other side of the Yarden. And they now come at the end of Masei, and they say, well, this situation with the daughters of Tzlachad, who they are daughters of this tribe, but now, because of laws of inheritance, which we're not going to get into now, but suffice it to say, Pshuto Shel Mikra, if they marry out, okay, if they marry out, then there's danger that the land will transfer to another tribe through laws of inheritance. And that's not fair. Okay. And so we're dealing with a problem that had been resolved on one side, but creates a difficulty on the other side. And that's what the last chapter, the last aliyah of Masei deals with. And a solution is being found in some way, that the land, in any case, will stay within the tribe of Menashe. Well, what does all of this have to do with the theme that I promised at the beginning? And that is, what does this have to do with the fact that Rosh Chodesh Av Elba, that Rosh Chodesh Av is the Tisha B'Av. So the tshuva of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, we know what the tshuva for that is, right? And tshuva is done because the second Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. The problem was one of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, Shlichut Damim. Second Beis Hamikdash, that wasn't the problem. The problem of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash was sinat chinam. Sinat chinam, right? Hate for no real reason, no basis for it. And so, what can we learn from this about our problem with sinat chinam, our problem with living in a situation of dysfunctionality? The Torah wants us to live in a situation of functionality. It tells us, therefore, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So there's a dysfunctionality. The dysfunctionality is the opposite of love. The dysfunctionality is that of hate. People say, well, the guy deserves it. I mean, what is this guy really bad guy? He did a bad thing. Look at with the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. The person did a terrible thing. And it proves how right the person who threw him out of the party was. This is the kind of guy we have, right? So it's right, but there's a higher level of understanding. To quote the Rav in a context which I don't want to get into now. People have quoted this recently and published it under my name, and they made a sweatshirt in the yeshiva there at Tzvi, saying Rabbi Ebner said. I was just quoting the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who said in a certain context that why is something usher? It's usher because it's usher to be stupid, right? It's usher to be stupid things. Now, to be stupid exists on a number of levels. One level of stupidity is 1 and 1 doesn't equal 3, right? Things that are just really, we'll all agree. If I were teaching you a live class, I'd ask you, give me examples of things that are obviously stupid, right? But there are things that are not obviously stupid. We have words for these, fancy words. In sociology, they talk about things that are done in society that have manifest functions. Everybody knows what the function of something is, why something is done in a particular way. But there are latent functions. There are hidden consequences, right? Sometimes you present a manifest function where you're really after the latent function, and the latent function is actually something that's good for society. But if you don't carefully understand what the consequences of something are, you can solve one problem only to create another problem, and sometimes even a greater problem than the problem that's the law of unintended consequences, or better yet, the danger of unintended consequences. I give you an example. You need some kind of an animal that will, destroy another animal, which is really problematic, right? So you bring, let's say, a fish that will eat up the bad guys, right? But then that fish will multiply and multiply and multiply. So you import it from the other part of the world and you put it into the river, and then, it starts spreading, and it has consequences that you didn't see, that is much worse than the original problem, right? If you solve the problem, you breathe freely, and then you begin to realize what it is. Bureaucracy, for example. Bureaucracy is a great solution to run things rationally, but you get bureaucracy if there has strict rules of the way things are done, can have unintended consequences when people don't know how to deal with an emergency situation. It's the classic example of a person being wheeled into the emergency room, bleeding to death, and they don't have his medical card or his Social Security. I mean, maybe this is maybe this is a proverbial story, maybe this has never happened, but on the other hand, the term bureaucrat sometimes has a connotation of a stickler for details that are not in place, that are not necessary to get the job done. And so what we have in Shevii is the issue of the unintended consequence and understanding that we have to find a resolution as the Torah, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Torah finds a way of resolving this, but not to get into the unintended consequence. So if we think about what we say on for example, in the Al Chet, which we will say on Yom Kippur, and we'll say Al Chet shechatanu lefanecha, right? Biyodim. I got Al Chet shechatanu lefanecha b'yetzer hara, with the yetzer hara, right? What would be Yodim? I did it knowingly. I got that also. Uvelo Yodim, and when not knowing, I didn't know. I didn't realize. Well, there are things that we should know. And I'm not talking about below Yodim as meaning I didn't know that a cheeseburger in McDonald's on Yom Kippur was forbidden for me to eat. I'm not talking about that kind of not Yodim. That kind of lo Yodim is not what I'm referring to. Lo Yodim is when I thought I was doing the right thing. Okay? I said, doesn't say that it's asur, but I didn't think of the consequences of doing it. And the consequences can be very, very deleterious. And I'm supposed to think of the consequence. I'm not supposed to not think. There's no thing that we could do that can't have consequences, if you will, for good or for bad. One has to consider. This is called making a cheshbon hanefesh, doing an accounting of what I've invested my time in, of what I've invested my effort in. And wise people make a cheshbon. And people who are wise not only make the cheshbon, the accounting, after the fact, after what they've done, to review what their practice was, what it was that they did, and that's certainly in place, but to think before you speak, not just whether it's rational, but whether it's right, and to think before you act. Where could it lead? I'm not talking about thinking in a way that will paralyze you, but consider, right? And know something about the situation before you make the choices. Because in the end, everything makes a difference. And it's not enough to say, I didn't know, when I could have known. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the wisdom to be strong, chazak, we need chazek, to be strong again, to think about it once, and to think about it twice, and through that, we will learn how to think. Be strong, and through that, we will be stronger.